I'm 𝗕cie Scaramucci, and welcome to Open Book, where I talk with some of the most interesting and brilliant minds in our world today. Joining us now on Open Book, Ben Smith, editor-in-chief of Semafor, but he's also a former media columnist for the New York Times and founding editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed News. But he's now out with a best-selling book, 𝗕cie, Genius, Rivalry, and Delusion in the billion-dollar race to go viral. So, Ben, you've had quite an illustrious career. You know, if you were on Wall Street, you would have been a partner in one of these big firms. Okay, you've done a lot of big jobs, Ben.
I know I made some poor choices in my life, I guess.
Well, no, I'm not saying that. You're at the top of your game, but I'm impressed with the things that you've done and the way you think about the media. So let's just go right there. When you talk about going viral or traffic, when I'm an old guy, so that was like clicks and page views back in the day. But it's a little different now, right? It's a little bit of TikTok virality, Instagram virality, something catches favor, or a meme on Twitter and it goes in an explosive zone. Tell us about what traffic means to you. What did it mean, and what does it mean today?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in this moment of real kind of weird change in really digital media entirely, and I think it's not totally clear what comes next. You know, we're at sort of the end point of what were the huge drivers of traffic. Facebook, first of all, but Twitter was the driver of political kind of attention and conversation. And it's not like those things will turn off the lights tomorrow, but they were the centrally cultural relevant forces for a decade, and they're not anymore, and they're fading. I was at the New York Times as the media columnist, and I left BuzzFeed in 2020. Got to the Times and was just sort of like, what just happened? Like, what did we all just live through? And the book was my attempt to kind of go back to the origin story of this moment where we all became obsessed with traffic, and where people, particularly in the worlds I'm most familiar with, which are media and politics, sort of shifted toward this kind of new kind of connection to people on the internet.
So some people would accuse the media of going for the eyeballs and potentially slanting and creating more bias than the media that you and I grew up with, sort of that Columbia School of Journalism objectivity standard. Where do you think things really are? Because I don't want the tribal angle. I want the reality angle.
So I mean, everybody has always liked to complain about the media, and I bet if I talked to you in 2004, you wouldn't have said, "Wow, the media is perfect. I love how they all went to the Columbia School of Journalism." And to me, honestly, this book is more kind of a history, and the way I think about it is more history than kind of diagnosis. I mean, I think if you go back to the beginnings of this moment of thinking of this new generation of digital media, what you had were people who were incredible, readers who hated what they were getting, right? Like you had a choice of a couple of newspapers, a couple of television networks that, conservatives felt like totally didn't represent them, that lots of people felt accurately had totally blown coverage of the Iraq War, the most important story of their generation, and who weren't on the internet, which is where we were all actually talking to each other by then. And so there was this, it wasn't like it came out of nowhere. There was this like popular interest in these new outsider voices that challenged this mainstream consensus. And they, I was part of that, like happily, had also had these new tools of measuring what people were interested in. And of course, journalists had always had the impulse to pander to their audience and to tell people what they want to hear. But suddenly you could really see it. Like you could know what people wanted to hear. And that was a big change. And in some cases, a very kind of, that led some people down a bad path.
I don't want to give away the book. The title of the book is 𝗕cie, Genius, Rivalry, and the Delusion in the billion-dollar race to go viral. But there's some fascinating vignettes in the book, and I'd like you to tease people with it if you don't mind. Let's go right back to Gawker and Denton and the party that you opened the book with. Some people don't even know what Gawker is, Ben. So tell us a little bit about what Gawker is, set the scene for us, and tell us the significance of that vignette.
Yeah, I mean, in that early moment in 2003, say, different people are looking at this. Suddenly, you can kind of like see who's coming to your website and why, and think about what can you give them to make them come back more and measure it. And one of the people, the pioneers of the space, a guy named Nick Denton, a former British journalist at the Daily Telegraph and the Financial Times, who, when he looked at American media and sort of American culture, he just saw lots of hypocrisy of people who wrote these kind of polite, wooden sounding stories in the New York Times and then went to a bar and trashed the people that they were writing about. And I think his view was like, well, you should be writing what you actually think. Like, journalism should be meaner and more honest and say what it says. And there were parts of this that honestly to me still feel really right. Like to me, actually one emblematic one, he kind of accidentally started a feminist blog called 𝗕𝗶𝘁𝗵. And the first thing they did was offer a $10,000 bounty for an unretouched photo of a celebrity in a fashion magazine. And sure enough, like, somebody stole a picture from Redbook of Faith Hill where she still had freckles and smile lines, which had gotten erased in the publication. And they published it, and it was kind of a sensation. And like, that was something that was probably good to get rid of in media in some way, not just obviously in women's magazines, but broadly this kind of photoshopping of reality. But there was also kind of a cruelty to it, a sense of like, well, look, if people just want pornography, we'll just show them pornography, and that's fine. And like a sort of eagerness, almost like a belief in playing to people's worst instincts. And Gawker, which began as kind of a media gossip blog, written by bright young women in New York who were fun writers and very plugged into the moment, and it was this very outsidery voice, gradually became more powerful, more important, more insidery, but kept that cruelty sometimes. And I think kind of became known for like what started to feel like bullying. And its worst was publishing, sex tapes without people's consent.
You see, it's fascinating. And after reading the book, I want to test a theory on you, get your reaction to it. So the media really was the first big movement in decentralization. Once the internet exploded, you had the arrival of Drudge. You yourself were at Politico. You then went over to BuzzFeed, become one of the founders there. And all of a sudden, you didn't need the printing press. You didn't need the papers dropped off and that whole distribution mechanism. You had this sort of viral, decentralized distribution mechanism for your property, if you will, your intellectual property.
Yeah.
I guess some cruelty came with that, though, didn't there, or did there not? And if there did, what was that from? Is that a lack of editor-in-chief saying, "Whoa, that's too nasty," or not objective enough, or what do you think it was? First of all, am I right on that? And if I'm not right on that,
your basic read that there were, people talk about gatekeepers in media, but like they had gates. Like you owned a printing press, or you owned or you had access to a broadcast tower, and most people didn't. And if you didn't have those things, like that was a gate. It was a real gate. Like gatekeeper, it wasn't kind of a sort of metaphorical, there are gatekeepers in society thing. It was like, well, if you don't have access to a printing press or a broadcast tower, you can't send your message widely. And that really changed. And there were these new people. Nick Denton was one of them. 𝗄𝗶𝘁𝗵, the founder of BuzzFeed, was another, who had kind of like who had ideas about what people would want in this new space. And for Denton, it was this kind of, rawness and unreserved exposure, which often was cruel. 𝗵𝗺𝗺, who I worked for at BuzzFeed, had this totally different point of view that in some ways was accurate, in other ways totally diluted, which was that he was the first to really see the social internet coming, the Facebooks and the Twitters, in the sense that the main way that your content will be distributed is somebody will share it with a friend, somebody will share it on a social platform, and you've got to be thinking, what will people share? And his initial theory was people will share things that make them look good to their friends. They'll share appeals for earthquake relief. They'll share cute memes and cat pictures and funny jokes. They'll share like kind of thoughtful articles. They'll share new news. That's what he hired me to get. But they would certainly not go on these platforms and scream about politics, because like, who wants to be that person? Who wants to look to their friends like some maniac yelling about divisive politics all the time? I mean, that obviously turned out to be a massive mistake. And that was all people wanted to use these platforms for.
Yeah, no, listen, I mean, I find the whole thing fascinating. Obviously, I'm a media aficionado.
Well, you're now a media participant.
I spent a lot of time consuming the media. I spend some time getting attacked by the media. It's all good. I'm a big proponent of free speech, and so people can write whatever they want. And people are upset with me right now because I see no problem with CNN bringing on Donald Trump. I don't like Donald Trump. I certainly don't want him to be president. But let me tell you, he's the leading Republican figure, and he's a congenital liar, but he's going to be part of the mix in 2024, and we're a free speech society, so we have to sort of live with these things. I just want to ask you about mythology, if you don't mind. If I say Arianna Huffington, we see sort of a left-wing rival to Matthew Drudge and the Drudge Report. But if I say Andrew Breitbart, because of his death, I think it means different things to different people. You knew Andrew personally. I had a relationship with him as well. I don't see him the way he is lionized today, but I'm just curious what your reaction is. Has he been mythologized in any way? Who was Andrew Breitbart for the young people that may not know him or know him personally?
He was, I think maybe it's in some ways more interesting to start with the myth, which is I think he's now seen as the father of contemporary conservative media. He had kind of an appetite for confrontation and a belief that politics starts in culture and in fights over, kind of divisive cultural subjects, which may sound a little familiar to people. And people who can, there was, when he died, I think it was in 2012, I believe, the people around him included Steve Bannon, who took over Breitbart, pulled it into this very kind of divisive and political direct full-on support for Donald Trump. It included Ben Shapiro, who went into this a direction that maybe was more about fighting the culture wars and producing something that connected with young people and young conservatives, but lots of people came out of his orbit, all of whom kind of fight, I think in some ways try to claim his legacy and say what it was. I mean, he was this very complicated, difficult guy who had this strange experience he was in Hollywood and kind of a misfit in Hollywood because he was a conservative, and got really addicted to this like early internet conversation on these message boards where this guy named Matt Drudge was sending around an email of updates of like anti-Clinton theories and stuff. And he was obsessed with Drudge, when Drudge, who was in many ways like a real breakthrough in the sort of tension between this wide open digital media and this sort of closed off traditional media. And he broke out when he heard that Newsweek was working on this story about Monica Lewinsky. And as Newsweek is deliberating about publishing it, Drudge just publishes it. And pretty soon after that, Andrew goes to work for him kind of as this anonymous minion. Like he's getting paid kind of irregularly, like whenever Drudge feels like sending him a check. He's, he has all this power of, having access for like 6 hours a day to the most important political platform in the country, but nobody knows who he is except for like occasional journalists like me who cotton onto it and started sending him links to our stories. And there was this moment I guess when was the Janet Jackson Super Bowl wardrobe malfunction?
Super Bowl,
Somebody told me they were at a party with him, and he, and he's there like programming the national conversation on this crazy thing that just happened. The language he's using on the Drudge Report is immediately on television, but no one at this party knows who the hell he is. And he tried to get out from Drudge's shadow in various ways. He co-founded Huffington Post with Arianna, which was meant to be a left-wing Drudge Report. He then founded Breitbart.com, which at first was trying to sort of siphon traffic and money off of the Drudge Report. It was a sort of a side hustle that Drudge granted him. And then eventually launched a set of blogs which were modeled on Gawker, on Nick Denton's Gawker, both in their structure and in that their big scoop was, a picture of Anthony Weiner's genitals, which was a very Gawker-y thing to do.
Yeah. Well, I remember that well, and I got the date wrong. I said 2007. It's a sign of old age, Ben. It was the 2004 January Super Bowl. Right. She was with Justin Timberlake, and obviously she had her famous wardrobe malfunction. So as crazy as that sounds, almost 20 years ago now, which seems like it was yesterday. But I had met Andrew at a David Koch conference. Now, the Kochs have also been mythologized, but back then, and just so everybody's clear, who paid tribute to Andrew Breitbart at his funeral, it would have included the likes of Mitt Romney, who is now a supposed rhino, but back then was sort of in the bell curve of conservatism. Of course, the Kochs now have been demonized, but I would have thought of them in 2009, 10, and 11 as more in the bell curve of conservatism. Yeah. And so here's the optimal question for you. has the media contributed to spinning things out, or were things spinning out of control anyway? Or was the segmentation and the decentralization that you describe in your book creating the political environment, or vice versa? Or how are they harmonious with each other?
Yes. Is that the right answer to that question?
Maybe, maybe yes.
Yeah, I
so
think
basically the media had something to do with it, right?
Of course. And I think, you, of all people, I think, kind of understand the extent to which these lines that people imagine between, there's this thing called politics, there's this thing called technology, there's something called business, there's something else called the media. Like those are fake lines. That's not how power works. That's not, and in fact, these things flow into each other very naturally. And and the same trends run through all of them. And I think that's really what, when you sort of step back and look at the story of the sort of period that I wrote about, it's, these deep changes in, particularly in digital media, but also in society, this collapse in trust in institutions that isn't just media institutions, rise in kind of individual voices, whether it's, whether and the institutions that are being replaced by individuals include the media, they include the Republican Party, where Donald Trump is more important than the party. And all these trends sort of run together, and I think are really amplified in that kind of 2015 to 2017 period, in particular, by decisions made technically at the social platforms, Facebook in particular, that they're seeing this rise in what they see as engagement. And from their perspective, they want you're spending 4 minutes on their site. They think that they can get you to spend 4 minutes and 30 seconds a day if they make some tweaks. Like, they're not thinking we want to elect some kind of politician or other. But what they do is provide this very rich platform for essentially, for something that is very well suited to right-wing populism, to this kind of confrontational, provocative stuff where, like, whether I like it or I hate it, I'm like, I want to write a comment and say, fuck you, or say, this is great. And the system then sees, wow, this guy is really engaged. Let's show him more like that. And I think, I think there were a lot of forces in society and real things people were angry about driving it too. And cable news is, part of this system too. It's not like there's some one factor, but certainly this all played out on social media. And actually one of the big ironies, because, I spent a lot of time in the book covering these new digital sites, notably the Huffington Post, that had sprung up to help Democrats, and that were progressive, and that saw the internet as, like, obviously is for young people and Democrats and progressives. And the election of Barack Obama is very naturally the culmination of the new media. I think that's how people saw it in the aughts. And in 2011, Obama went to visit Facebook. And he kind of went without saying, like, oh, Facebook's a democratic institution. It's where college kids are. It's like visiting a campus. And I think that was just this huge misunderstanding of what digital media was going to do. And in fact, the sort of politician who used it best, the movement that used it best, was Trump.
Well, let me say this, and I want to get test you. I mean, I think because you have such insight into this and you're so real and honest about it. Are we at a point in time, I don't know, maybe 30, 40, could even be 50 years ago, David Halberstam wrote the book, The Powers That Be. There's just this great book about centralized media. I think he had Henry Luce in the book and Bill Paley, and there was centralized media, and there was, frankly, some coordination with the American politicians. As an example, Franklin Roosevelt, they never showed him in the wheelchair. Sort of, that was okay. Jack Kennedy had his share of adulterous affairs. They sort of left that in a quote unquote lockbox somewhere. That era obviously is gone, never to come back. But I guess what I'm wondering is the era of our national unity also gone, because when you had the centralized media and that was a centralized light beam into everybody's home, there was more of a unifying message. We sometimes say to each other, wow, we can't even debate anymore because I'm getting my facts from Fox News. You may be getting your facts from MSNBC or vice versa. And so now we don't even have the same facts when we come to the debate stage. Am I right about this? Am I wrong about this? Is there a cure for this, or what is the outcome, and how do you think it affects our national unity and our current tribalism?
That's a good question. I I mean, I do think that that era that's gone, that people remember more fondly than honestly they experienced it. Lots of people, including like conservatives and people who cared about civil rights and lots of others, felt like totally shut out by that sort of shared facts zone, and those shared facts weren't always facts. But I do think that era is over. But I think the era we all just lived through is over too, where you have this unbelievably divisive landscape all playing out on Facebook and on Twitter and on one platform, and we're headed into something more splintered, but maybe a little less divisive and shouty too. I think podcasts like this are part of it. People are finding voices they connect with and trust, and looking for help synthesizing all the chaos out there, rather than wanting just to like immerse themselves and swim in the chaos. I mean, that's, I started this new thing, Semafor, and that's how we're thinking about it a lot.
I was just going to say that I think Semafor represents that, because let's go there for a second. What does Semafor represent? I find the writing in Semafor, you guys seem to be first to the news, give you a lot of credit on scooping, but I think you're also laying it out there fairly objectively. Am I getting it wrong, or are you coming at it from a slant that I'm not totally getting? And I think I'm pretty good at reading the slant.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying. I mean, I hope. Yes, I mean, it's Semafor. I mean, I think our goal. I mean, I don't think anybody buys that like we can create a new class of news robots who just tell you the facts as they are with no perspective. And so I think what we're trying to do is say, we're reporters who know what we're talking about, but and we can get, we can break news, we can tell you things you didn't know, and we'll also tell you what we think about that, what we think it means, that like we think Scaramucci totally screwed this thing up, but also we want to recognize like we could be wrong about that. We're not going to be wrong about the facts, but
well, I mean, enough people have written that about me. I don't think you guys need to.
And if somebody else thinks you did a fabulous job, we're going to go out of our way to find somebody who disagrees with us and include their voice too. And if there's perspectives from other countries, from other angles, we're going to try to sort of pull all that stuff together. Because I think part of the experience of reading the news now is thinking like, what isn't this publication telling me? Like, this all seems too simple. Like, what's the alternate point of view? And then you read something in the New York Times and you go out and Google the same story to like read it a few other places and try to triangulate what's going on. And I think our sort of perspective is we want to help you do that rather than try to feed you a kind of simpler story or simpler perspective.
I think it's very, very fair. I want to go to the subtitle of this book. It's Genius, Rivalry, and the Delusion in the billion-dollar race to go viral. So I want to go to Delusion first, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then we'll go to Rivalry and Genius, but let's focus on Delusion. Who are the most deluded?
I mean, I think that the people, Jonah Peretti, Nick Denton, me, like everybody who thought that we could kind of ride this tiger, and both that we could exercise some level of control over it, but also that the people running these big platforms, Mark Zuckerberg in particular, would ultimately want to align them with professional journalism and professional entertainment, that it was going to be in their interest to, like the way the cable operators, created an environment where CNN and ESPN and MTV could thrive, that these new social platforms would ultimately need to create an environment where journalism could thrive, among other things. Just wasn't true. Like, that was a mistake. I don't know if it was a delusion or just wrong, but that was a huge error. And that's why I think you look around, you see Vice, you see BuzzFeed, you see all these places really struggling.
I think what makes something a delusion is that you have some certainty, or you at least have some belief that it's going to go a certain way when the facts represent otherwise. I mean, there was delusion on the Trump campaign in 2016 about the ability to control the president, who was going to control him. I had dinner. I went with General Kelly to the Marine Corps Scholarship Foundation dinner 2 weekends ago. And we were obviously reminiscing about my firing, but we were also reminiscing about the Trump administration and how difficult it was, but how we were all delusional. Okay, so delusion is an interesting word. We can get things wrong. And sometimes we get it wrong, not because the facts are wrong, but because of our prism in terms of looking at the facts. We have a tendency to want to alter it to fit a truth that we may believe. I guess where I'm going from in that, Ben, what is the thing that you all were guided to? What, you thought you were going to be the next Time magazine virtually? You thought, like, what was the vision at the time?
I mean, it really was the idea that just as, like, the advent of printing had created this whole profusion of newspapers, like, that hadn't existed before, of the certain kind of, like, mass ability to print, and the and particularly, though, cable. Just to dwell on that and go back to it, because it's hard to understand how people were thinking, particularly, like, what were investors who put hundreds of millions of dollars into new media thinking? Like, how do you explain that? And the actual answer is cable. People laid wires in the ground, and they thought, and they needed all this content to fill those new pipes, and they hired MTV and ESPN to do that, and they built huge businesses and made enormous amounts of money. And I think people who were investing in that space, that was fundamentally what they thought was going to happen, that these were new permanent pipes for the transmission of information, Facebook and Twitter and Snap and Pinterest and whatever. And
I think it's fascinating. I think it makes your book your book is great, even for people that are not interested in journalism, just interested in business and the current zeitgeist. The book is phenomenal. We're running out of time here. I want to go to my 5 words. So every one of my authors gets 5 words, Ben, and then you need to react to those 5 words, sort of like the Malcolm Gladwell blink sort of a thing.
Right.
I say the word, and then you say blank. Ready?
All right.
Let's start. BuzzFeed.
Viral. Are we're free associating here, or should I, like, talk for a while?
Yeah, no, free associating. Yeah, viral, right? Viral is what you
Sure.
think. I say BuzzFeed, you say viral.
Okay.
How about Vice? I say Vice, you say what?
Brand. Very pure brand.
Okay. Facebook.
Out of fashion.
Okay, so Facebook has jumped the shark. What about Semafor?
Please sign up.
All right, that could be your best one. Okay, I gotta go to one subject, which is a thorny one for me, and less so probably for you. But let's go to Sam Bankman-Fried. I say Sam Bankman-Fried. You say what? I'll tell you what I say. I say betrayal. I mean, that's my one word. But what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that way too. I mean, I didn't have the kind of he invested in our company, and I didn't have the kind of complicated relationship or exposure that you guys did. But also, yeah, I mean, he really presented himself as something he wasn't.
Yeah, which
and obviously created huge headaches for all his business partners.
Gonna happen. Okay, in our last 30 seconds, I don't know anything about the media. I'm in the bookstore on Amazon. I see the title Traffic, Genius, Rivalry, and Delusion in the $1 billion race to go viral. I'm buying the book because why, Ben Smith?
Because it tells you how we got here.
I think that's it. I mean, it's an excellent examination of the social zeitgeist, and it'll get you right up to speed on where we are and potentially where we're going. You wrote a phenomenal book. I wish you great success with it. And thank you for joining us today on Open Book.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was really fun. It's good to see you.